Kofi lived a simple life with his only daughter, Elle. Their home was small, and their crops rarely yielded enough to feed them. Despite his best efforts, Kofi could never seem to break free from the cycle of poverty. The villagers, though hard-working, shared similar struggles. On one fateful afternoon, a wealthy stranger named Kwaku arrived in the village. He was dressed in fine robes, his horse adorned with gold trimmings, and his presence commanded attention. Kwaku was a businessman from a distant city, and he spoke to the villagers about prosperity and wealth. He claimed that he had discovered ways to summon great riches, and that he was willing to share his knowledge. The people, especially Kofi, were drawn to him. Kwaku's words were like honey, promising a future of abundance where hunger would be a thing of the past. For Kofi, who had struggled to provide for Isi, Kwaku's words struck a chord. He saw in the stranger's promises a chance to give his daughter a better life, a life free from poverty. Though cautious, Kofi found himself intrigued, and he spent more time with Kwaku, listening to his tales of wealth and magic. As days passed, Kwaku's charm grew stronger. He began to visit Kofi's home regularly, sitting by the fire and telling stories of grand cities and untold wealth. Kofi, desperate to change the course of his family's life, listened intently. Kwaku spoke of ancient rituals passed down through generations, rituals that could grant untold wealth to those willing to make the right sacrifice. At first, Kofi dismissed the idea, unsure if he could trust the stranger. But the more Kwaku spoke of the magical world he knew, the more Kofi felt a stirring within him. The thought of no longer worrying about how to feed Isi, of living a life of luxury, filled him with hope. Kwaku, sensing Kofi's growing desperation, pressed further. He assured Kofi that the ritual would not cause any harm, that it was simply a way of channeling the natural energies of the universe to bring about wealth. The price, he claimed, would be small, just a token offering, something pure, something valuable. Kofi's doubts lingered, but the vision of a prosperous future for Isi was too tempting to ignore. He agreed to learn more. One evening, after many discussions, Kwaku's words grew darker. He explained that the key to unlocking the ritual's full power was a pure offering, someone of great innocence and purity. At that moment, Kofi felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Kwaku suggested that Essie, his beloved daughter, would be the perfect candidate. The ritual required a sacrifice of someone close, someone without sin, someone who was still pure of heart. Kwaku reassured Kofi that nothing would happen to Essie, that the ritual was designed to elevate her as well as Kofi. But the words hung heavily in the air, and Kofi felt a sickening twist in his gut. He loved Essie more than anything in the world. She was his heart, his only treasure. The thought of offering her for something as dark as a ritual made his heart race in terror. Yet Kwaku spoke of the wealth that would flood their lives, of the food, the land, the luxuries they would have. Slowly, Kofi's resolve began to crumble. He had worked hard all his life with little reward. The promise of wealth became irresistible, and Kofi, despite the fear in his heart, agreed to the plan. Essie was a kind, innocent soul, full of dreams and wonder. She loved her father dearly and believed that he always made the right decisions. To her, Kofi was a pillar of strength and wisdom, and she never questioned his choices. She could not understand the burden he carried, nor the struggle of wanting to provide more for her. When Kofi spoke to her, he did so carefully. He explained that there was a way to change their lives for the better, that a ritual was needed, one that would bring prosperity to their family. He spoke of sacrifice, but in a way that made it seem almost noble, a necessary step to achieve greatness. Essie, ever trusting of her father, agreed without hesitation. She did not question the details, believing that whatever her father said must be for the best. Her heart was filled with hope, thinking of the happiness and comfort that awaited them. She had no idea of the dark path that Kofi had chosen, nor the terrible price that would soon be demanded. As they prepared for the ritual, Essie's innocence and love for her father made her blind to the danger that was lurking in the shadows. The night before the ritual, Kofi's heart was heavy with doubt. He tossed and turned, unable to sleep. His mind replayed the words of Kwaku over and over. A small sacrifice. A pure offering, Kwaku had said. But as the night stretched on, Kofi realized just how great the cost would be. Essie was everything to him. She was the light of his life, the reason he woke each day. The thought of losing her, of sacrificing her, seemed unthinkable. He stared at the ceiling, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. And yet, the allure of wealth, of a life without struggle, clouded his judgment. He had seen the desperation in Essie's eyes when she spoke of her dreams of a better future. He had promised her that things would get better, and now Kwaku's offer seemed like the only way to keep that promise. Kofi wrestled with his conscience, but in the end, the temptation was too great. The decision was made. He would go through with the ritual, hoping that it would bring the life he dreamed of for his daughter, even if it meant making the ultimate sacrifice. The day of the ritual arrived, and Kofi led Essie into the forest as the sun began to set. The air was thick with an unsettling energy, and the trees seemed to whisper with an eerie quiet. Kwaku awaited them in the clearing, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. He had prepared everything. The circle of stones, the altar, the symbols drawn in the earth. Essie, still unaware of the true nature of the ritual, was excited. She believed that this would be the turning point in their lives, the beginning of something better. Kofi, however, was filled with dread, his heart pounding in his chest. The ritual began as Kwaku chanted in a language Kofi didn't understand, his voice low and hypnotic. Essie stood in the center of the circle, her eyes closed, trusting her father's guidance. Kofi could feel the pull of dark magic surrounding them, and with each passing moment, he questioned his decision. But it was too late. The ritual was underway, and the price for wealth was about to be paid. Kwaku's chant grew louder, and the air around them seemed to crackle with dark energy. At this moment, Kofi realized the full extent of what he had done. Kwaku, sensing Kofi's hesitation, turned to him with cold, piercing eyes. He explained that the ritual required more than just a willing participant. It required a sacrifice of the purest soul, someone with no ties to the material world, someone who could serve as a vessel for the magic. Kofi's heart sank as Kwaku pointed to Essie, the girl he had promised to protect, and told him that only her essence would complete the ritual. Essie, still standing in the center, did not fully understand the danger she was in. Kofi, paralyzed with guilt and fear, could not stop the ritual. The magic had already taken hold, and the world around them began to spin. As Essie's soul started to fade, Kofi's heart shattered. He had lost his daughter, not to death, but to the darkness he had invited into their lives. When the ritual finally ended, Kofi was left in a state of shock. The forest around them seemed eerily silent, and the ground beneath his feet felt unstable. Essie was no longer the same. Her once bright eyes were now dull, and her body appeared frail, as though her very life force had been drained away. Kwaku, satisfied with the ritual's outcome, looked at Kofi with a smirk, his cold eyes gleaming with triumph. But the wealth that Kofi had been promised never appeared. Instead, a heavy darkness seemed to descend upon the village. Kofi's heart twisted with regret and guilt as he tried to reach out to Essie, but she recoiled from him. She looked at him, her face filled with confusion and sorrow. She did not understand what had happened, only that she felt broken inside. Kofi's world came crashing down as he realized the terrible truth. The wealth he had been promised was a lie, and the price for it had been his daughter's soul. Kofi spent days searching for answers, speaking to the elders and shamans in the village, hoping they could help him reverse the damage he had caused. But the answer was always the same. Once a ritual like this had been performed, it could not be undone. Essie was lost to him, and the wealth he had dreamed of would never come. Kofi's desperation grew as he watched Essie wither before his eyes. She no longer smiled, no longer spoke of her dreams. The light in her eyes was gone, replaced by an emptiness that Kofi could not fill. As the days passed, Kofi realized that the ritual had not only stolen his daughter's soul, but had cursed them both. The villagers, once kind and welcoming, now looked at Kofi with fear and suspicion. They whispered of the dark magic he had invited into their lives. Kofi's heart ached as he realized that he had not only sacrificed Essie, but had brought ruin to his entire village. Kofi returned home, his mind consumed by guilt and regret. His house felt cold and empty, even though Essie was still there, sitting silently in the corner, staring into the distance. The once vibrant, lively girl he knew was now a shadow of herself. Her spirit seemed to be lost, and no amount of fatherly love or concern could bring her back. Every night, Kofi relived the moment when he had handed her over to the ritual, the moment when he had chosen wealth over his daughter's well-being. The weight of his actions pressed on him, suffocating him with each passing day. He could no longer look at Essie without seeing the devastation in her eyes, the silent accusation in her gaze. The village had turned their backs on him. The whispers of his dark dealings had spread like wildfire, and soon everyone avoided him. Kofi, once a respected man in the village, now walked the streets as an outcast. The wealth he had hoped for never came, and all he had gained was the loss of his daughter and the curse of his choices. One evening, as Kofi sat in despair, a woman appeared at his door. She was older, her face worn with years of hardship, but there was no mistaking her. It was Kofi's wife, Afia. She had been away on a long journey to visit her sick sister in a neighboring village. When she had returned, she was horrified to find the changes in her family, especially Essie. Afia had been unaware of the ritual and the consequences that had befallen them. Kofi's heart broke as he explained everything to her: the promises of wealth, the ritual, and the price they had paid. Afia listened in silence, her face a mask of disbelief and sorrow. When Kofi finished his story, Afia's grief turned into anger. She could not forgive him, but her love for Essie was unyielding. Together, they decided they would seek help from the spirits of their ancestors, hoping that they could undo the damage and restore their daughter. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but they could not sit idly by while their daughter's soul remained trapped. Kofi and Afia set out on a journey to seek the wisdom of the village elder, a woman known for her deep connection to the spirit world. She was said to possess ancient knowledge of powerful rituals, capable of reversing the effects of dark magic. The journey was long, and Kofi's guilt weighed heavily on him, but Afia's determination kept him moving forward. They traveled through dense forests and crossed rivers, enduring the harsh elements as they sought the elder's guidance. Along the way, Kofi reflected on his past decisions, each step seeming like a reminder of the wrongs he had committed. He could feel the spirits of his ancestors watching over him, judging him. By the time they reached the elder's hut, Kofi was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The elder greeted them with a knowing look, as though she had been expecting them. Without a word, she led them into her dwelling, where the air was thick with incense and the walls were adorned with ancient symbols. The elder, a wise and venerable woman named Nana Akua, listened intently as Kofi and Afia explained their situation. She did not interrupt as they recounted the events that had led to their daughter's suffering. When they finished, she sat in silence for a long moment, her eyes closed in deep thought. Then she spoke in a soft, grave voice. "You have committed a grave mistake, Kofi," she said. "The path you chose was born of greed, and the spirits demand a great price for such a wrong." Kofi's heart sank as he heard the elder's words. Nana Akua went on to explain that reversing the ritual was no simple task. The darkness that had been invoked could only be undone by a powerful act of true sacrifice, one that came from a place of genuine love and repentance. Kofi, hearing these words, was filled with a sense of hopelessness. How could he undo the damage he had caused? Was it even possible to save Isi, or had the damage already been done beyond repair? Nana Aqua gave Kofi and Afia a cryptic task: to bring an offering of true selflessness and sacrifice in order to call upon the spirits to heal Essie. She instructed them to seek the ancient well of the lost souls, a mystical place known to only a few elders. There, they would have to perform a ritual of purification that required not material wealth, but the surrendering of something far more precious: their pride, their fears, and the very essence of their love. Afia, ever resolute, agreed to the task without hesitation. She had already lost so much and would stop at nothing to save her daughter. Kofi, on the other hand, was filled with dread. The task seemed impossible. How could he, a man who had already failed in the most unimaginable way, be worthy of such a profound sacrifice? His guilt gnawed at him, but he understood that this might be his only chance to redeem himself and save Essie. The journey to the Well of the Lost Souls was fraught with challenges. Kofi and Afia encountered wild animals, harsh weather, and treacherous terrain. But through it all, Afia remained steadfast. Kofi, though weakened by his guilt, found strength in his wife's determination. The closer they came to the well, the more Kofi began to reflect on the enormity of the sacrifice they were about to make. He realized that this was not just about saving Essie, but about saving himself, about facing the darkness inside him that had led to his poor choices. One night, as they camped beneath the stars, Kofi confessed his regrets to Afia. "I failed Essie. I failed you," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. Afia, though heartbroken, looked at him with understanding. "We are only human, Kofi, but we can still make things right if we choose to." Her words gave Kofi the courage he needed to continue the journey. When they finally reached the Well of the Lost Souls, Kofi and Afia stood before it, awestruck by the sight. The well was surrounded by ancient trees, their twisted roots entwining with the earth in strange patterns. The water in the well was dark and still, and the air around it was thick with an eerie energy. Nana Aqua had warned them that the well was a place of immense power, but also one of immense danger. It was a place where lost souls lingered, and those who sought to use its power could easily lose themselves. Afia stepped forward first, her heart filled with purpose. She knelt beside the well and offered a prayer, pouring her love and sorrow into the water. Kofi followed, his heart racing as he prepared for the sacrifice the elder had spoken of. He took a deep breath, knowing that this moment would determine whether they could undo the curse and restore their daughter. As Kofi knelt by the well, he felt a shift in the air, as though the spirits of the ancestors were awakening. The water began to ripple, and a cold wind swept through the clearing. Kofi felt a deep ache in his chest, as if his very soul was being drawn into the well. The spirits were testing him, challenging him to confront his own darkness. The ritual was not only about restoring Isi, but about confronting the greed and selfishness that had led to her suffering. Kofi was asked to offer his pride, his guilt, and his fear. He had to let go of everything that had held him captive, and only then would the spirits consider his request. Kofi closed his eyes and whispered a prayer. He offered everything: the loss of his pride, the weight of his guilt, and the acceptance of his failure. The moment he did so, the well began to glow with a soft, golden light. The spirits had accepted his offering. With the ritual complete, Kofi and Afia waited in silence, hoping that their sacrifice had been enough to save their daughter. After a long while, the golden light from the well began to fade, and the clearing returned to its natural state. But something had changed. They felt a shift in the air, a sense of peace that had not been there before. Kofi and Afia rushed back home, their hearts filled with hope. When they arrived, they found Isi sitting by the fire, her eyes bright and full of life once again. The darkness that had clouded her soul was gone, replaced by a radiance that seemed to emanate from within her. Essie smiled at them, and for the first time in a long while, Kofi saw his daughter's true spirit shining through. She was no longer lost. The ritual had been successful, but Kofi knew that their journey was far from over. He had paid a great price, and the road to redemption would continue. Kofi, Afia, and Elle returned to the village, where the people greeted them with wary but hopeful eyes. The curse that had once haunted their family was broken, and the weight of Kofi's guilt was lifted. Though they would never forget the pain they had endured, they now understood the value of true sacrifice, love, and redemption. Kofi had learned that wealth could never replace the love of family, and that no amount of gold or riches could bring true happiness if it was built on the suffering of others. From that day forward, Kofi and Afia vowed to live humbly, cherishing every moment with ease. The lesson they had learned was a painful one, but it had brought them closer than ever before, and they were finally at peace. As the days passed, Kofi worked hard to rebuild his reputation in the village. The people, though still wary, saw the change in him. They saw how he cared for Isi, how he and Afia had sacrificed so much to restore their family's honor. Slowly, the villagers began to accept them back into the fold. However, Kofi knew that he could never undo the harm he had caused. The trust that had been lost could never be fully restored, but he was determined to show that he had learned from his mistakes. He started small, helping his neighbors with their harvests, repairing homes, and offering what little he had. His actions, though modest, spoke volumes.